All right. So today on certificates training, we are going to be going over the use cases of certificate records. We're going to show you how to enter certification records, how to organize them, track recurring certifications and mandatory certifications. We'll also talk about how to put links onto your certificates to make things like the actual certificate documents easier to track down. And we'll talk about a variety of different certificate reports that are available to you. A fair number of things, but the certificates is a reasonably self-contained set, so we should be fine there. So to start off with, I like to talk a little bit about the difference in FirePro between training and certificate records. Broadly speaking, training records are intended to be used to document things that are being delivered by fire department personnel inside the fire department. Usually that also includes specific curriculum elements that you're working on in terms of your standard training curriculums or your internally developed training curriculums. Certificates tends to deal more along the lines with things like certifications that you can get outside the fire department, historical equivalencies for someone who has a variety of the larger scale certifications. Certificates are also very good for tracking activities that need to be done on a recurring or a regular basis. So, sometimes you would want to think a little bit about, does it make sense to put this entry into the training module? Training records tend to be quite a bit more detailed. Certificates tend to be quite a bit faster to enter and are primarily used for reference purposes. So to start off with, I want to just do a quick rundown of the standard ways of creating a new certificate record. So if I go into the certificates module, I can use the green plus button here to create a new certificate file. So when I look at these new certificate files, there's going to be a number of pieces of information that I can add to these. One is certificate category. So when we look at how to create certificate records, I'm going to talk a little bit more about categories, but they're generally going to be used to organize your certificates as far as making data entry easier and also allowing you to run reports on specific classes of certificate and certification at the same time. So for example, if I pick a certificate category, the certificate drop-down list is then just going to show me only the certificates that fall into that particular category. So I can quickly filter. Otherwise, if I look at any certificate category, I can see there might be a very large number of certificates potentially that I could have in here. So I personally find it's nice to quickly filter by category if I've got things organized that way. Certificates also have a begin date and a completion date. Generally, the completion date is the most important piece here. So for example, if we were doing a 2-day certification course, we could just put in there completion. We also have a number of hours amount here. Usually what we're wanting to do is, if there's a standard number of expected hours that a certification is supposed to take, that's the amount we want to put in here. We can talk about some of the variation on that, but broadly speaking, this number of hours is going to be used for reporting. Certificates, for example, can be flowed into the hours worked reports for things like the federal tax credit reporting or just general timekeeping reports. So we normally do want to put in the expected number of hours that a course would take. We can assign certificates to a session if we want to. That's not strictly mandatory. You can be fairly relaxed on this unless we anticipate a need for a detailed station sort later. You can also attach instructors to certificates. So they can either be instructors from the fire department instructor list, or we can use the other option to create a custom list of additional certification instructors. Often we can be fairly general on here, depending on how much detail we want. But for example, I could put in Red Cross, and I just could put in something like Red Cross instructor, because that information might be on the certificate itself. We're always kind of balancing how much time do I want to spend on this thing. So in this case, we could just say it was a right cross instructor, or I could have something like Fire College or online on here. I'm sure I'm spelling that wrong, but whatever. So something like online course. So there's a variety of things we could put in the other trainer section if we want to document that. What I can also do here is attach one or more attendee to this certificate. So if a number of people entered it, I can just select them all and put them on this. So what's going to happen here is that in a straightforward certification like this one, we're going to see the same completion date for each person as we have in the overall completion here. That's normally because we're assuming that these certificates are an actual course that people are going to and are finishing at a specific time. However, if we decide we want to, we do have the ability to right-click on a particular person in this list and select manually sign off certificate and actually enter a different completion date for that person if we want to do that. Each individual person does also have a grade option if you want to record the specific grade that they received for the certificate. Again, that might not be critical because you may well have the grades in a separate file. And a lot of the time, if an instructor's coming in, they might provide you with PDFs of all the certifications or a finalized report. One of the other things that you can do on a certificate is you have access to a links tab. So we can use the other links function to create an additional link. And if we had a PDF of the different certifications or of a sign-in sheet or summary report, we can just add that right to the certificate. I personally like to add the certificate files to the certification record rather than attaching them directly to a personnel file. The reason for that is that they're a lot easier to find when they're attached to the certificate record, as opposed to having a huge mass of PDF records or different certification histories attached directly to the personnel record. That tends to make things a little more difficult when you're trying to track down something specific. So this is what we would consider to be a very straightforward certificate and the standard way of creating certificate record. Now, generally, before you go in and start creating a bunch of certificate files, you also want to create the certificates themselves. So that's done through the maintenance menu at the top of the screen under the certificates option. This is something that usually only administration level users in FirePro have access to. So if you don't have access to the maintenance menu, you can check and see if your profile needs to be updated. So if I go into certificates here, I'm going to get a master list of all the certificates that I have in the system. If I want to create a new certificate, there's a number of things that I can pick here. So I can give it a title, call it new certificate. I can put in a description of the certificate. That's obviously not strictly mandatory, but it can be useful. I should also point out that usually when I'm creating certificates, I don't normally want to create a new certificate entry for each year of a certificate, unless I know that there's been really significant changes to that certification in a particular time period. I don't want to do this because, first of all, we don't want to have a ton of certifications. Secondarily, if we're dealing with a certification that needs to be redone every couple of years, we can get reminders on it, and we don't necessarily want the certificate reminder to say new certificate 2023 when we're renewing it, because they might be doing it under a different year. The certificate entries themselves also have the year of completion on them, and ideally the certificate links are going to have the year of certification and the specific course that was certified. So you're kind of giving away some flexibility by creating certificates for a specific year's course, like, new certificate 2023. So what I can also do here is I can determine if I want grades or percentages for the attendees. I can also put those certificates into categories. I'm going to talk a little bit further down the line about reporting for certificates as well. The categories are going to do a couple of different things for you. First of all, they're going to make, as we saw, the certificate entry process easier and smoother. But also, you're going to be able to run reports for personnel on specific categories of certificate if you want. So, for example, if you had a set of certifications that you wanted to make sure that your recruits had, you could put them into a recruit category so that you can say, show me all my recruit personnel and run a report on how much progress they've made on the recruit certificates. It helps you line up those two pieces of information. You can also have certificates in multiple categories if you want. This allows you to have some organizational structures and also some structures dealing with specific training requirements, and the certificates will go into multiple categories. If I'm dealing with a certificate that needs to be done on a regular basis, this would be things like first aid or WMIS or a whole range of regularly occurring certifications. And this can also even include things like, some departments put in their driver's license abstracts in here as a certificate that needs to be done on a regular basis. So I could put in here a recert period. If I click include in hours worked, then this certification will be included in the hours worked report if I want to run that for things like the federal tax credit reporting or general time usage reporting. So this is frequently the case. Let's see here. I'll make sure I got my chat up. So this is frequently the case. You might not want to turn this on if you're dealing with a certificate that people generally are getting through work, for example, because that normally wouldn't be counted towards federal tax credit reporting time. So we can also, if we need to, sorry, I forgot, the notice period. When FirePro creates notifications and reminders, and we're going to talk about the reminders setup in here a little bit more, the reminders are generally going to be created with a notification date that is in advance of the due date. So this can tell you how much notification you want in terms of getting your reminders in advance. I can also flag certificates as mandatory. So there's two different levels of mandatoriness, which is a word that I just made up, but I have a degree in English, so it should be okay. But mandatoriness, a blanket mandatory certificate means that every personnel record in FirePro will be monitored to see if they have this certificate. Generally, it is not that useful to create blanket mandatory stuff unless you know for a fact that every personnel file is going to need this certification. More frequently, we tie mandatory to specific groups, which are either training groups or organizational groups within the department. So, for example, if I set this as a mandatory certificate for the recruit group, it means any personnel record that I put into the recruit group, this certificate will automatically show up as one of their mandatory certificates so that you get reminders related to it and you get notifications that these certificates are not completed. So that's what I'm going to do with this one so that we can see that it is set as mandatory for specific groups. Now it's just going to do a quick reminders update. So what happens when I set a certificate as mandatory is that when I have personnel records that are attached to that recruit group, this will then become a notification this certificate needs to be done by these people. So In this case, if I go in and I look at an individual personnel record, under the attendance tab in certificates, I can see I've got a variety of different certificates that this person has done. And with each certificate, we can see all the historical dates that they've completed. So if they've done multiple different certificates, then we would see a history of all of them appearing on it. What I'm also going to get now for people in that group is if I look under my reminders, so the reminders module in FirePro is going to display several different pieces of information. In this case, I'm going to filter just for certificates so I can see it. But the reminders show you several different pieces of info. So we can see we've got a due date on it and a notification date. So in the case of the new certificates that we just created, I set the notification date to be 3 months in advance of the due date. So we can see we've got a February notification date and a May due date for these different certifications. And these are all going in based on the date that I set these certificates to be mandatory for these people. If I was creating a new personnel record and adding it to the certificate of them to that recruit group, then it would show up in the date that I created the personnel record and added them to that group. So it'll automatically sort of pick up the trail once you put people in those various different groups. Now, in this case, we can see I've got some new certificates that need to be certified for these different people. There's other ways that I can pull this information as well. So if I am in the personnel module, I can use my reporting function and do a certificates report. There's 2 reports here that might be useful, but in this case, the personnel without a mandatory certificate report. Yes, I'll show you how to set up email notifications on that as well. So if I set a personnel without a mandatory certificate report, I can either pick the specific certificate that I want, or it's only going to show me the mandatory certificates. But in this case, I'll say any of them, and I can run a report, and it's going to show personnel that are currently missing some of the mandatory certificates, Basic Life Support Red Cross, and the new certificate that we created. So if I want to go in here and say, for example, one of these people has completed this certification, they've emailed it to me, I have it in here. The simplest way to log that is to just go to their personnel record, go to their attendance and certificates tab, and create a new certificate directly from there. And in this case, I will quickly filter for my recruit training and pop in my, that one, which might be a different one. So we can find our new certificate here. So once I add my new certificate, again, I can put in the dates, the amount of time that the certificate took, my instructor if I want to, and I've already got Christine added to this course and the current date information entered. So I could then also go ahead and use that other links function once I save to add a new PDF on here. And doing it this way makes things quite convenient for you, because if, say, for example, you ever need to track down when did this person complete that course or that certification, I can just go into their personnel record, find the new certificate, and double click on that item to bring up the actual file, and it's got the link attached to it right away, so I can pull that over. If I had a huge number of PDFs in the links section, I might be going through a large list of things, which is a less convenient way to find stuff. So now that I've got this person in as having completed that certificate, the reminder will automatically be cleared. And now we're down to 3 people who need to be certified on that course. So this gives you the ability to relatively quickly track, are these certificates mandatory? Do they need to be completed? Many certificates that you enter are not going to be mandatory or recurring. They're going to just be regular certifications that you just want to log. Now, the other thing about this certificate is, since it is a recurring certificate, what I'm going to see now is 2 years in the future, there's going to be a reminder created that indicates that this needs to get redone. So I'm going to say last year, but then roll the date forward to 2025 and look for my certificates. Did I get the date range right? I don't know. Okay, yeah, I got the date ranges wrong. So we can see now that it's already 2024. If I look 2 years in the future, I'm going to see that the certificate needs to be recertified for this person. So you're going to start in 3 months in advance of when that 2-year recertification period comes up, you're going to start to see recertification notifications come up for yourself. So ideally, this is a good way, especially when you're onboarding new staff members or new members of the department, and there's a number of certifications and documentation pieces that you want to keep up on a regular basis. Getting started like this can be a really effective way to do it, because it's going to give you a prompt that this needs to happen initially, and then once they complete it, starts to roll you forward into that recurring process. It is also possible, as we saw in the chat, to actually set up emailed notifications of these certificates as part of this process. So that's done under the setup menu in the option called email reminder settings. So the first thing you need to do here is make sure that FirePro can send emails in your system. So in this case, I can set my email reminders. And what I can do is create multiple different types of certification reminders if I want to, or I can create just a generic one. So in this case, what I'm saying is certificate records, any certificate reminders I want to have emailed, and I can set both a template that they're being emailed to, and if I use the send to affected personnel, it'll automatically send a copy of this reminder email to the actual person who needs to be certified or recertified. So that'll look in their personnel file. In order to set what emails I want to send this to on an organizational basis, I have to build what we call an email template, which is a standard set of rules for sending this email. So in order to set up an email template, I need to go to the email module and go to the templates tab. So I can create as many different templates as I want. And in this case, I would just give it a name. You can put subject and body text in if you want, but the emailed reminders will normally be filling in some basic information automatically if you don't want to use it. And then we have our recipients. So I can actually flag exactly who I want to include in my recipients list. And those can be specific members of the department, specific ranks, specific personnel groups. I can pick and add arbitrary manual email addresses. So I can do an awful lot depending on exactly who I want to send this information to. I don't need to include the specific person that the certificate that pertains to in here, though, because that is going to happen automatically when you set up the rules for sending out a certificate. So again, if you want to go through the whole detailed process of setting this all up, just let me know, and we can make sure your email's functioning and set up some samples in there. It is also a good idea in the context of setting up and starting to use certificates to think about how you want your personnel groups organized. So if you want to build personnel groups, you can go to any personnel record. And in the employment tab, there's this groups box. This is an editable box so that I can make changes to my groups. But each member of the department can be assigned to as many different personnel groups as we want. And usually it's a good idea to try to make these line up with different training groups within your organization. So in this case, we can see recruits, first responders, service crew. So I could add more groups in here as well. You can also use groups for general organizing purposes. If you have members of, say, a new truck committee or safety committee or something like that, you can put that in, assign people to that group, and then quickly filter for specific groups of people if you want to, say, send emails to them or just generally keep track or run reports against it. So there's a lot of different uses for that group function, but thinking about them in the context of certificates can be really helpful. Often having a recruit or a new member group is a best practice because it lets you tie a bunch of information, especially in terms of certificates, to that group of people, which can really make the documentation of the onboarding process a lot smoother. So there's another level of detail we can also get into with certificate records if we want to. So one of the options we have, if we're really getting into certificate records, we can go in and create certificates that are tied to specific elements of the training curriculum, where the system will not require that you enter a completion date for a certificate. It will simply monitor the training curriculum and track sign-off completion. Once the person is done signing off on all the subjects, it'll automatically sign off on the certificate as well. So there is the option to do that in some detail. So for example, if I wanted to make this particular, we'll go find our new certificate. And so if there was some actual elements in the training curriculum that I wanted to make sure people completed before this certificate was signed off, I can go to the subjects tab of the certificate and I can add them from my master list of curriculum elements. So I could say, I want to make sure that they have actually signed off on ICS 100 in the training module before this certificate shows as complete for these people. If I add subjects to a certificate, the certificate entry records are going to look a little different. So what I'm actually going to see now is, and we generally don't see on certificates that have subject requirements, we generally don't see a completion date on here because we're saying completion is going to be set based on when they complete those training subjects through the training module. It's not going to be something that is done through the certificate itself. You can still use the manual sign-off by right-clicking and manually signing off someone on the certificate. But that's usually only if they've completed in the past and the certificate is showing that it's not complete for them. And we could go through that on a specific basis. But now what's happening is that the system, this certificate is actually monitoring Christiane to see when she completes that required course. So the course completion is done through the training module. So if I create a training record in here, I can go in and say, okay, it was a standard practice. In this case, we are going to say it was ICS 100. That was and we can see on here that ICS is attached to the new certificate certification. So it gives us a hint that this is the one we want to do. And what I need to do here is I will just quickly filter for my recruit group and put in Christiane on here. Now, you do need to actually sign off the subject. So that's going to be signing the person off on it. But once I do that, when I look at the certificate itself for this person, I'm actually going to see now that the certificate has actually been completed. And I see a little bit more information on the certificate regarding this particular person. So I can see here that this certificate now has a completion date. As of tomorrow, that completion certificate will turn black to indicate that it has been completed in the past. But this is going to give me the ability to quickly see, do we have specific ongoing certifications that have subject requirements? that they can turn on. This does tend to be more complicated to manage. So we normally want to think kind of carefully about, is this a useful application for it? But certainly there are some cases where there's a number of classroom elements that need to get completed that you want to actively monitor. Attaching them to the certificate can be an effective way to keep an eye on that. So what we can also do there, if we need to, is in this case, we can also go in and say, okay, I want to run in my certificates a required subject status report. So in this case, when we have subjects, it's actually going to quickly check, are they attached to any certificates that have subject status requirements? And if they are, there's Brad's probably signed off. People have signed off on quite a few things, so it's having to go through and see if they've completed it. But ideally, we're going to see that those particular subjects need to be signed off and completed as we go. Now, what I'll just do is, while that's doing its monitoring of all the different certificates that we're seeing, what we can also do here is go in and we'll start a new session. So in this case, okay, so there was a number of other courses that had training subject requirements. So we see that there's the annual training passport that had a bunch of specific courses showing when they completed these, but there was a bunch that they have not yet completed. So that's obviously a much more complicated one, but we can see in this case, ICS 100 needs to be completed for these people. This is the much simpler one. I normally wouldn't advocate maybe quite that many subjects attached to a training certificate. There are other ways to do that, do the training module as well. So there are also, when we're running reports on certificates, several different ways that we can pull up information about the certification status of members of the department. So one of the ways to do it is to just go through the certificates module. I can run certificate searches for any time period that I want to do that. And then I can generate a sort of a detailed output report, which shows the different certificates and who did them, a basic breakdown. What I can also do in the certificates module, and this tends to be quite a bit more helpful, is I can look at certification by attendee or by member of the department. So, for example, if I wanted to see which members of the department had not completed that new training certification or new certificate that we just created, I could go in and say, okay, filter all my recruit training course certificates. I'm specifically looking for my new certificate. And the default search on here is to show anybody who's taken one of these certificates. So in this case, I get a limited set, but I could also say, show me everybody who has not taken this particular certificate. So it's going to allow me to actually relatively quickly break out a list of anybody who hasn't taken it. And in this case, I might want to filter that larger list down to my recruit group. So here's the people in the recruit group that haven't taken the certificate that I am interested in. Likewise, I can look for an entire category of certificates where I can say, show me everything in the recruit training set and show me who hasn't taken those specific sets. I think I might have the wrong category there. So it's going to give me the ability to track by group who has not taken specific certifications. I can even look for an individual person if I want to do that. So it gives me a fair bit of flexibility. I can also, in this system, look for anybody, for example, who has a sort of a recertification date period within a specific time range and actually see the completion and expiry dates for those certificates for people. Yes, you can export a variety of the certificate reports into Excel. So the simplest way to do it is you can use this printer icon on the right. There is also, if we look under the personnel module, if we go in and select under certificates, the certificate roster report. So anytime you see a roster report in FirePro, that is an Excel grid-based report. So I'm going to say I want to print, well, we'll just do a selected lines for the one person here. Otherwise, it's going to be quite large. Certificate roster. So that's going to look like this. And so in this case, it's going to show you each individual certificate down the side, each person, and if they completed the certificate, we'll see the completion date. I picked somebody who has no completions, so we would see the date that they completed the certificates in there. So that can be an effective way to, if you want to get a big picture look at exactly where people are at on a larger set as well. So roster is always a good one. So there's also going to be a few other certificates. I can do an out-of-date certificates report in the personnel module. Again, I can look for certificates by category. I can organize things by personnel or by certificate, and I can quickly see a list of these are certificates for this person that they have that are out of date. They're not completed. Now, what you may find in here is if you look at these, you might identify in your system, okay, well, we're not doing these anymore. So let's get them off this list. And the way you would do that is by going into the master certificates records, finding the certificates that you don't want anymore, and using the inactive tick box to flag those certificates as inactive. So once a certificate is inactive, it's going to clear the associated reminders and take it off the lists that will show, why does this, do they have incomplete, out-of-date certificates. There is also we talked about all these, the completed certificates report is fairly straightforward. It's just going to allow you to pick a time frame and potentially a certificate or certificate category, and show exactly what certifications each individual person has completed in the requested time frame. So variety of different reports that are tied in there. And there's a range of different things that you can use the certification records for. So that about covers the range of things I was going to talk about today. Does anybody have any questions? You can certainly put questions in the chat or take yourself off mute to ask if you've got any.